We have lots to discuss here in today's video, including lots of rumors surrounding the Pittsburgh Penguins. We've already seen one trade after a poor start to the season. What other moves might be coming next? What is Kyle Dubas working on? One NHL insider even thinks the possibility might now exist of the possibility of Sidney Crosby moving on from the franchise. Where did he think he could go, and what are the potential returns and how it could all work? We'll discuss that scenario. Plus, we have comments from former Ottawa Senator GM Pierre Dorion that was extremely interesting, discussing who else he was talking to and who else were the finalists for his head coaching job when he hired DJ Smith all those years ago. Plus, we have a big milestone in Toronto tonight with Oliver Ekman-Larsson, more news from the NHL waiver wire, several updates from the injury front, and a big update regarding the 2018 World Junior Championship trial right now. With those players that are waiting trial, a date has finally been set. We'll discuss that and more coming up next. So welcome back to another video here, Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have lots to discuss here today. It's been a very busy and interesting day of NHL news. First up, let's acknowledge a big milestone that's going down this evening. Toronto Maple Leaf defenseman Oliver Ekman-Larsson is playing in game number 1,000 tonight. Of course, Ekman-Larsson had a long run with the Arizona Coyotes. At one point was kind of considered very much a combination of overrated, overpaid player. And I think, honestly, he was just miscast and kind of given too much responsibility, too much money, and a team that just never really came close to realizing its goals. And unfortunately, he took a lot of the brunt of it there. But since he's, even in Vancouver, wasn't overly good either, but since he's moved on from there, last year in Florida, this year in Toronto, I think we're seeing an entirely different player. He seems to be a lot better suited for the role and the contract and everything, and I think we're seeing a very different version of him later in his career. So, he's been through a lot of ups and downs, obviously through Arizona, Vancouver, Florida being a Stanley Cup champion last year, now the Toronto Maple Leafs trying to help them get over that hump. So certainly he's had a pretty solid career. He's a 26th skater overall in NHL history to accomplish this, and only the 9th defenseman. So I know sometimes when we hear and talk about celebrate players hitting this milestone of 1,000 games, it might seem like not a big deal, but it really is. There's really not that many players that have hit it over the course of history. So congrats to him on that front. More news from the NHL waiver wire. We have the Buffalo Sabres claiming James Reimer today. Of course, he was on waivers from the Anaheim Ducks. He originally signed with the Buffalo Sabres in the offseason. Obviously had ambitions of getting an NHL job with the Sabres this year. Battled with Devin Levi for the number 2 goaltending spot. Of course, UPL Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen secured that number 1 spot after a strong finish last year and another strong training camp this year. Reimer ended up on waivers, got claimed by the Ducks, who were needing help because of the John Gibson injury. Well, Gibson's back now, so he ends up on waivers, goes back to Buffalo. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is dealing with a minor injury right now. He may not miss a whole lot of time. He's considered day-to-day, but for the time being, Reimer very well could come in handy. So we'll see how the second stint this year in Buffalo goes for James Reimer. Lots of other updates around the NHL injury front. The Boston Bruins, of course, picked up a big win in St. Louis last night, but it didn't come without losing a player to injury. Defenseman Hampus Lindholm, who was very important top 4 defenseman for them, is going to be out for quite an extended period of time. They have now recalled Jordan Oesterle as well. He's technically considered multiple weeks, as we really don't know the full exact extent. But Jim Montgomery, head coach of the Bruins today, just said, he's going to be out 4 weeks. It's not a short-term deal. So we will see how he recovers and just how long he'll be out. But it will certainly be a blow to the back end for sure for Boston. The Anaheim Ducks today recalled Jansen Harkins and Drew Hellison from their AHL affiliate, and Cam Fowler and Robbie Fabry. Even though they've been injured for some time, they weren't officially on IR just yet. Now they've been moved to that. The Canucks sent down all 3 prospects that have been getting NHL time lately. Baines, Lekkerimaki, and Ratu all sent back to the American Hockey League. It's an off day for them. It very well could be the reason. It's more of a paper deal to kind of regain and accumulate more cap space. Wouldn't be surprised if a couple or maybe even all three are recalled in time for their next game. We'll see. Some news in Toronto tonight as well. They've activated defenseman Jani Hakanpää from long-term injury reserve. He's making his Leafs debut this evening. Of course, the Leafs are battling the Washington Capitals. Of course, Hakanpää hasn't played since March of last season, so didn't play towards the end of the year and into the playoffs with the Dallas Stars. Signed with Toronto, which we know that contract took forever to get confirmed because the Leafs were doing a lot of medical research on his knee and the injury. He just recently completed a conditioning stint down in the minors to kind of see how things went from that front. Obviously, it must have gone well for them to get the recall and get him in the lineup. So for tonight, Hakanpää along with Alex Steeves are in the lineup, and Nick Robertson comes out, as well as defenseman Simon Benoit. I thought maybe it might not be Benoit. I thought maybe it might be Timmins that comes out, but looks like Benoit is the odd man out for this evening at least, and we'll see how the Maple Leafs do with this lineup. I know they've had some good games during the absence of Austin Matthews so far, but they lost 3-0 to the Sens last night, looking to bounce back on their back-to-back today against the Washington Capitals. The Buffalo Sabres today did, as I mentioned earlier, Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen's day-to-day, but as well as Tage Thompson is going to be out for a little bit. They may play in the next game. It's not a guarantee that they're going to be out and miss time, but they are dealing with injuries and could miss a little bit. On the other hand, defenseman Mattias Samuelsson is going to be out for an extended time. Technically, they're listing him as week-to-week, but when head coach Lindy Ruff was talking about it, one of the first things he said was that he could return this season. So when they use language like that, you think that the week-to-week is going to be several weeks. So it could be a long stretch without Samuelsson there with the Buffalo Sabres. So we'll see how that affects them. In Vegas, they've recalled Grigory Denisenko, so hopefully he'll get into some games as well. Lots of other news around the NHL today, including a big update on the 2018 Canadian World Junior Championship case. Of course, we know that a bunch of players were facing charges here and have been awaiting trial for some time. Looking at Carter Hart, Dylan Dubé, Michael McLeod, obviously Cal Foote and Alex Formanton. They're all theoretically former NHL players at this point. None of them are currently signed. I know as of last offseason, some of them were on expiring deals and were restricted free agents, but none of them were retained or given new deals. So they're all technically free agents. But as far as the NHL is concerned, a couple of them didn't get signed in the KHL. McLeod, which was one of them, I think it was McLeod and Dubé, if I'm not mistaken, and McLeod has been since released from that contract. So these guys have been awaiting trial on these sexual assault charges stemming from the incident in London, Ontario in 2018, celebrating their World Junior Championship victory in an event with Hockey Canada. So we now know when this is going to take place and when it's going to go to trial. It's actually going to be April 22nd, 2025. There was a possibility that it was going to be held over until September, but that's not going to be the case. The judges ruled that there's no need of that. I think with enough of the pretrial work done, that April 22nd is sufficient for them to proceed. It's expected to last around 8 weeks is roughly when we could go. Now, I know there was some people asking questions because there was wondering if some of the other players that were connected to this team and could have been at this event, if any of them would be called as witnesses during this trial. And that was a question I know a lot of fans had, and we still don't know. I didn't see any updates on that front. If we do find out, of course, I'll talk about it here and update things on the channel. But obviously with an 8-week approximate trial, that kind of puts us towards the end of June. So that's also right around the time that you're looking at the Stanley Cup being awarded. The NHL draft would be close to that, not far from free agency. So, we know that June, especially the second half of June into the July 1 UFA day, is usually, the busiest off-season news cycle that the NHL has. Like that's the 2-week period is insane, like I said, between everything else. And now we'll add the outcome of this trial into that mix here as well. I know. So I guess at the very least, this will have a conclusion. We'll have an outcome. I'm sure the victim here that's brought forth these accusations will be looking forward to hopefully getting their justice and having all this wrapped up here as well. And we'll know hopefully what really happened and see what comes from it. So April 22nd, 2025 is when everything is scheduled to begin. Some very interesting comments as well from former Ottawa Senator GM Pierre Dorion. Now, of course, it was weird seeing Pierre in the building a few nights ago for an Ottawa Senators home game. Of course, he is now working on the media side. So, certainly making appearances like that where he used to work as the GM must be a little bit weird and awkward for him, I would think. But, working on Montreal radio with, he was on BPM Sports, and of course, everything was in French as well, but it's real easy to translate in that sense. But I do want to listen to more of the comments, but essentially the clip that's kind of gone viral here is him talking about when he hired DJ Smith. Of course, that was a big hire for the franchise and who was going to lead this team from the coaching perspective. And he mentions that the two finalists that were in the mix along with DJ Smith for the job were Patrick Roy and Jacques Martin. I was like, oh my God. You had DJ Smith, who was an up-and-coming assistant coach at that point, working with the Toronto Maple Leafs under Mike Babcock. And then you had Patrick Roy, of course, NHL legend, who previously worked as a head coach with the Avalanche and was still running things with the Quebec Ramparts in the QMJHL. And then Jacques Martin, who recently returned to the franchise as a head coach and now works with the Sens as a coaching consultant. Either of those guys would have been a better job. Now, I was always a DJ Smith supporter. He seemed like a really good person, maybe good at motivating, but, at the same time, he just came across like he was their buddy. He was their friend, and I know that they really liked him, but one of the big things is he didn't really see much when it comes to holding players accountable, and this Sens team is finally starting to see more success this year. I know it's early, but a lot of projections have them making the jump and having improvements and having not a guarantee, of course, but a much better shot at getting in the playoffs this year. And you can see Travis Green holding the players accountable, has a completely different way of going about things. And, obviously, nobody is perfect, and every coach is going to, work differently with different groups, and different players are going to respond well to different coaches. But you have to think with the young talent, if they would have been taught a different way and held accountable and taught more how to win early on and had a more demanding coach like a Roy or a Martin, could they have taken a big step a lot sooner? There was a stretch there when you could see that DJ Smith was a good option for them for the early part of the rebuild. But I just can't help but wonder if they would have went with a better option, if they could have not really kind of accelerated the rebuild. And, not that you want to have we're not talking a 2 or 3 year rebuild here. The Senators have been out of the playoffs for going on 8 years. So, if they could have gotten there even after, say, 5 years, that's kind of at the point when a lot of people were expecting them to turn the corner. It could have been absolutely massive for this franchise. I can't help but wonder as well if they might have gone with DJ knowing that he would take a much lower salary than the other two. At least you would think based on experience. I know obviously during the Eugene Melnyk era, Eugene obviously had a knack and reputation for being a tad on the frugal side, we'll say, to be kind. So I do wonder what all that kind of meant, but it's just mind-blowing to know that these other guys wanted to be the coach and were not given the job. I just don't know how you fumble that. And as much as Pierre get a lot of praise over the last couple of years, he was GM, looking back now, there's really a lot of damage that was done to that franchise, and he really should have been out of that GM chair long before. But of course, as long as, Eugene was there, one, it was a case of not many people really wanted to work with Eugene. A lot of people wouldn't work probably for the salary that he was going to pay. And it just was really, really tough on the franchise. So it's really nice to see the team be in different hands and have a new owner, new GM, and just a whole new way of doing everything, because it certainly was well needed after all that time. Now, as I mentioned, not only Oliver Ekman-Larsson hitting his game number 1,000 milestone tonight. Of course, that's, guaranteed he's playing in that game right now. But a couple other big milestones that expected this week, and one of them could be happening tonight and may have happened while I recorded this video. It's hard to say, but Sidney Crosby is 1 goal away from 600, and Connor McDavid is 1 point away from hitting 1,000. I mean, for Crosby to hit 600 goals is absolutely incredible, especially considering that Sid's never really been known as a pure goal scorer. He's more of a complete player, more of a pass-first guy. At least that's how I think of him. So to hit 600 goes to show the longevity and just how hard he's worked at his craft over the years. Remember back to those early days when he was, had the neck and head injuries and, sat out a long stretch, and there was a lot of concern if his career was going to be over or greatly shortened at a young age. Not only has he overcome that, but look at what he's accomplished. 3 Stanley Cups, all those individual accolades, and now he's just climbing up the list here of history before he, ends up being finished. He's got lots of game left in him for sure. I wouldn't be shocked to see Crosby play into his 40s. I know he signed a 3-year extension here with the Penguins, but I have no doubts, and I wouldn't be surprised if he continued playing beyond that. So 600 will be his next goal. That's absolutely amazing. And Connor McDavid will be the 4th fastest player in NHL history to hit 1,000 points. So obviously, the longer he can go and playing at this high level will, determine where he's going to be at in NHL history as well. We know both those guys are, first ballot Hall of Famers. The second they retire, the second they're eligible, they'll be going in, no doubt about it. Absolutely generational type talent. So it will be cool to see those big accomplishments hit here in the very near future. Now, speaking of Crosby, I want to talk about him a little bit further and his team, the Pittsburgh Penguins. We know they've had a really tough start to the season, had some bad, embarrassing losses. They've had some bad goaltending. They've had some bad defending. They've had some lack of offense. This team really has a lot of issues, and we saw a fairly small trade amongst the team with Kyle Dubas there last night, trading Lars Eller to the Washington Capitals. That's probably just the beginning to a bit of a retool that we're going to see here in the coming weeks and months as this team tries to make changes and tries to find a more competitive edge and win more games and do what it can. I mean, supposedly this team, including ownership and Kyle Dubas, has made a promise to Sidney Crosby that they're not going to go into rebuild mode while he's playing. So clearly, I don't think we're going to see a sell-off of veterans for future-based packages. That's not expected at this point from the Pittsburgh Penguins. But there's plenty of other players that are, secondary, more complementary depth players that could get moved for sure. And they would generate, either a return of another roster player that might fit the team better, or maybe they do get a little bit of a future-based package in some sense to kind of restock the cupboards. I know Dubas is trying to balance restocking the cupboards while bringing in talent to try and win today. And obviously the moves they made in the offseason, which really wasn't that extensive, certainly hasn't gone very far. The team is not very good. They have a variety of issues, a variety of things that need to get better for them to be serious contenders, not only at making the playoffs, but to be anywhere near the conversation about who could win a Stanley Cup. Outside of Lars Eller, because it's been reported by multiple people that the Penguins are wide open for business, and the reports were that if your name is not Sidney Crosby, you're probably being mentioned in trade talk, and you might be available right now. Looking at some of the talent around them that could be moved, you have to think a player like a Michael Bunting, maybe a Matt Grzelcyk. I know Frank Saravalli made mention that the Canucks really like Marcus Pettersson. There was a point when we thought he was going to get a contract extension with the Penguins, but it seemed like Kyle Dubas would prefer to keep all of his options open. And as much as they do like Pettersson and do have interest to bring him back, if they can get a good return on him, maybe it doesn't make sense to sign him, right? So they have to look at all of those options and determine how to make this team better, not only in the short term, but in the long term as well. So, those are only some of the other names that are getting a little bit of play out there. But Kevin Weeks kind of surprised me on NHL Network earlier tonight, talking about the fact that he really thinks that Sidney Crosby could actually end up deciding that he would accept a trade. And he mentions that he can see him accepting a deal to the Nashville Predators. He says that he would be the ideal player that the Predators would want. We know Barry Trotz and the Preds want another center who can play top six, somebody who's obviously hard to play against, reliable both ends of the ice, can produce offensively. You can't describe Sidney Crosby any better than the description of the player that the Nashville Predators and Barry Trotz are looking for. So clearly, Sidney Crosby would make just about every other team better. I don't think there's anybody who would doubt that. So that's obviously a given. However, we know that Sidney Crosby has greatly committed his life of hockey to the Pittsburgh Penguins, and there's many that believe there's no chance that he would accept a trade. He wouldn't have extended himself on a new contract with the Penguins if he didn't intend to see it out. So there's some Pittsburgh media that insist that's what's going on, and they don't see anything else unfolding. Could there be other deals? Sure. Could Erik Karlsson go? Could Bunting go? Could Grzelcyk go? Could even Malkin and Letang would probably not, but it would be more likely again than Sid. But with Weeks saying that he can see Crosby going to Nashville, he said even though Nashville might not be where they want to be in the standings and they might not want to be, considered a cup contender today, he feels that Crosby would relish at the opportunity to go to Nashville. That, if he was going to accept a trade anywhere, that clearly Nashville would be a premium destination that many players like. He would see a lot of talent on that team and could see how he could help them get where they're wanting to go. Obviously they added Stamkos, they added Marchessault. You've got Ryan O'Reilly there, you got Roman Josi, you've got, UC Saros. There's a lot of pieces in Nashville that are top-end talent. You get Philip Forsberg. I didn't even mention Philip Forsberg yet. How crazy is that? So goes to show you that they could be great. Now, some people think they need to change the way they play. Some people think they need to change, some more internal things about how they're doing. Going to go back to more of the old school Nashville identity of being defense first, and maybe not, that the offense is going to take some time with all the changes and whatnot. But, at the end of the day, can you imagine Crosby anywhere else but in Nashville? Of course, that panel that Weeks was on NHL Network, they also talked a bit about mentioning teams like Boston and Colorado. Obviously he's good buddies with Marchand. Fellow Maritimers played together on Hockey Canada's tournaments. So, I don't know that he'd really want to see himself being a Bruin. That would probably be really weird. But, would he play with Marshy? Maybe. You got to think that, a lot of people, I've seen some prominent people, including like Paul Bizanet out there as well, saying, let Sidney Crosby go to the Avalanche to play with McKinnon. As much as it's probably a pipe dream, it'd be so good for hockey. And, he's not wrong. It would be very cool and interesting. A lot of people want to see, Penguins fans, I'm sure don't, but a lot of other fans would love to see him, be in the playoffs and just have a more prominent role with where the league is at, instead of being on the outside looking in and kind of watching him kind of go into the twilight of his career with his team being nowhere near, the powerhouse and the contenders for even making the playoffs at this point. It's kind of sad to see from that standpoint. So, Kyle Dubas has a massive job in front of him to get this team where it needs to go. There's going to be multiple deals. I'm sure, like I said, we've mentioned Grzelcyk, we've mentioned Bunting, we've mentioned Erik Karlsson. I think you can throw Tristan Jarry into that conversation if they could find a deal for him. I don't think Kevin Hayes will be back after this year. Marcus Pettersson. There's lots of names out there that they could swap and try to find a way to make the team better. And I fully suspect that, I'm not sure how busy Dubas is going to be, but I have no doubt that the pressure is on him by ownership and by Crosby to make this team better before time runs out. It's still early in the year, and maybe we see a coaching change. Mike Sullivan's been there a super long time. I know he's well respected, has done a lot there, but is it time for a new voice? I know ownership, especially there, is very fond of him. Dubas claims to have a really good relationship with him too, but something has to give in Pittsburgh. And what is it going to be? Is Kevin Weeks on to something? Is there any chance that Sid changes his mind? And if he does, is Nashville the destination that makes sense to you? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, of course, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you next time.